The first time I saw the recruitment sigil, it was carved into the wall of a drinking hall, a crude stencil, half faded by the grime of countless hands, yet it burned in my memory. The promise was simple service to the Emperor, profit under the warrant, and a life beyond the factories of Gathis Prime. I was 24 standard years old, my lungs scarred from chemical dust, my soul already tired. I didn't join for faith. I joined because the stars, even in their silence, looked cleaner than the air I breathed. The recruitment chamber smelled of incense and oil. An administratum scribe with half a face of augmetics read my file without looking at me. His voice rasped through vox filters, a dead man performing routine. My blood was processed, my name recorded, my past erased. The servitor branded my wrist with the mark of indenture. My skin blistered under the heat of it, and I remember thinking that pain was proof I still existed. The scribe congratulated me with mechanical indifference and moved on to the next candidate. To him, I was a number in a quota. To me, it was salvation through bureaucracy. We were ferried to the ship in silence. 50 of us in a pressurized shuttle, all wearing identical grey fatigues. No one spoke. The air was thick with the scent of fear and recirculated sweat. Through the small viewport, I saw the void for the first time. It wasn't black as I had imagined, but vast and indifferent, like an ocean that had forgotten light. When the ship appeared, it filled the view completely. The sovereign's lament, a name both noble and defeated, its hull stretched into infinity, covered in cathedral spires and mechanical ribs that pulsed faintly with reactor glow. It looked less like a vessel and more like something that had grown from the void itself, a creature pretending to be a machine. We docked. Metal rang beneath our boots as we crossed into the airlock. A priest of the machine god greeted us, his face a mask of copper plates and clicking lenses. He recited the canticles of activation, his voice layered by vox feedback until it sounded like 3 people speaking at once. We repeated the responses we had been taught during transit. The words meant nothing, but the rhythm was hypnotic, a ritual that made obedience easier to bear. Inside, the ship felt alive. The corridors hummed faintly, as though the bulkheads were breathing. Cables ran like veins along the ceilings, dripping condensation that tasted of oil. Servitors moved in slow procession, carrying tools and prayers in equal measure. I had seen machines before, but nothing that radiated such quiet authority. The lament was ancient, older than most worlds. The officers said it had served 12 rogue traders and outlived them all. Some whispered it remembered each one. Our quarters were small hexagonal cells stacked like coffins. No windows, only lumen strips that dimmed according to ship time. I shared my cell with a man named Mikhail, a miner from Lycoris. He spoke in short sentences and coughed up black residue whenever he laughed. He carried a small pendant carved in the shape of a winged skull, claiming it had been blessed by a saint. I didn't believe him, but the gesture comforted me. In the dark, belief and hope are easy to confuse. The first weeks were consumed by induction drills and maintenance rituals. The officers drilled into us that the ship was sacred, its reactors holy, its mechanisms divine extensions of the Omnissiah. Every morning we knelt before the engine shrine while the tech priests chanted binary hymns. The air trembled with static. I remember the first time I saw the plasma coils ignite. The brilliance was blinding, pure, almost beautiful. We were told to never stare directly at the light, that too much truth could blind the soul. I think that was the only honest thing they ever told us. Life aboard the Lament became routine. Each day began with the bell of assembly, followed by inspection, then endless hours of labor. I worked in reclamation, scrubbing fuel conduits, clearing rust from pipes that groaned with age. The work was monotonous, but it gave my mind structure. In a place where time lost meaning, repetition became sanity. Mikhail said it was better than the mines. I wanted to believe him, though sometimes I dreamed of open air, even if it was poisoned. Weeks turned to months. The ship crossed uncharted voids, its mission known only to the officers. We were told not to question, only to maintain, to believe. The priests said the Emperor watched us through the ship's sensors, that every act of service was recorded in divine data. Sometimes I wondered if the Emperor even remembered this vessel existed. Out here, light years from anything resembling civilization, Faith was less a choice and more a survival mechanism. The first time I saw the captain, it was during the Feast of Ascension. He appeared at the head of the Grand Mess Hall, flanked by 2 servo skulls bearing censers of burning incense. His armor gleamed like polished bone. His eyes cold and distant. He spoke of purpose, of humanity's eternal destiny, of the honor of serving the warrant. His voice carried the weight of certainty, the kind that crushes doubt before it can form. Around me, the crew cheered and wept. I clapped with the rest, but inside I felt nothing. The captain's words were too perfect, too rehearsed. I had seen priests use the same tone when blessing corpses. That night, Mikhail asked me what I thought of the captain. I said he looked like a statue that had forgotten how to die. Mikhail laughed until his cough returned. Later, as I drifted towards sleep, I felt the hum of the ship under my bunk. It wasn't mechanical vibration, it was slower, deeper, like the heartbeat of something immense and patient. I pressed my hand to the wall, and for the first time, I thought I felt it breathe. Days blurred, work, prayer, ration, rest. The same cycle repeated until time itself seemed to dissolve. But beneath the monotony, something shifted. The lights flickered more often. Strange whispers echoed through the conduits, voices layered like distant static. The tech priest said it was electromagnetic interference, nothing more. Still, I caught myself listening when I shouldn't. Sometimes in the spaces between the hum, I thought I heard words, not in Gothic, but something older, something the ship remembered long before we boarded. Mikhail began having dreams. He said he saw faces in the walls, shapes moving behind the steel. He stopped eating, stopped laughing. When he slept, he muttered prayers to the Emperor and the machine god in the same breath. One night, he woke screaming, swearing that something had whispered his name from the vents. The next morning, he was gone. The supervisors said he'd been reassigned to reactor maintenance, but his pendant was still on his bunk. I took it not out of faith, but because leaving it behind felt like letting him vanish completely. After Mikhail disappeared, I started writing on scraps of rations paper. Notes, observations, anything to remind myself that I still existed. The lament was too quiet, too vast. The priest said the void cleanses the mind, but it felt more like erosion. Thought by thought, piece by piece, the ship was wearing me down. I still had faith in the Emperor, or something close to it, but it was thinner now, stretched like the light of distant stars. Once, during maintenance, I paused by a viewport near the outer decks. The void stretched before me, cold and infinite. I realized I could stare into it for hours, and it would never stare back. That was the moment I understood what service to the Imperium truly meant. Not glory, not purpose, just endurance. To keep existing, even when existence itself had forgotten you. Weeks after Mikhail vanished, they reassigned me to plasma conduit maintenance along the ship's dorsal spine. The work was dangerous heat so intense it could vaporize a man in seconds if the shielding failed, but it kept me away from the crowded quarters and the murmurs that had begun to infect the lower decks. Men whispered that the ship was haunted, that it carried something old in its hull from the time before the Imperium. I didn't believe them. Belief is a fragile thing, and I had already spent mine. The new crew chief, Gravis, was a broad man with arms like servo pistons and a voice that rattled bulkheads. He claimed to have served 3 rogue traders before this one. When he spoke, people listened not from respect, but because silence had become a habit and Gravis broke it like a weapon. He told stories between shifts, half-truths about ships that sang in the warp and captains who burned their souls for power. Most of us laughed, but not with conviction. In the quiet that followed his tales, I often heard the hum of the lament change pitch, like it was listening too. Our shifts ran for 20 hours at a time, punctuated by brief, ritualized meals of nutrient paste. The air was thick with vaporized metal and ozone. The conduits glowed faintly beneath their protective sheaths, casting sickly blue light across our faces. It wasn't the work that wore me down, it was the silence between the sounds. Sometimes, when the engines cycled down to minimal output, I could hear something moving behind the plating. The pattern wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Gravis said it was pressure shifts. I pretended to believe him. The first fatality happened on our 3rd rotation. A junior tech named Loran was replacing a coupling when his harness failed. He fell into the vent shaft and didn't stop screaming for nearly a full minute. By the time we reached him, there was nothing left but scorched fabric and a smear of liquefied metal. Gravis ordered us to recite the litany of efficiency, then told us to continue. The body wasn't recovered. The priest said the ship would absorb his service, that his sacrifice would feed its function. No one questioned it. Death aboard the Lament was just another form of maintenance. At night I dreamed of the sound. That pulse from the decks below, faint but steady, as if the heart of the ship was still beating long after the Emperor's light had left it. I started writing again, lines of thought that made no sense even to me. The ship remembers, I wrote once. The hull is not steel. It is memory fossilized into obedience. When I read it back, I couldn't remember what I meant. 2 weeks later, the lower Vox channels began transmitting static. The priest said it was solar interference, though we hadn't passed near a star in months. Voices blurred through the interference, fragmented, metallic, like someone trying to speak through water. I recognized Mikhail's name once, buried beneath layers of distortion. I told Gravis, and he stared at me for a long time before replying. "Forget it," he said. "The ship's full of ghosts. Some of them still work the engines." The next day, Gravis disappeared. His tools were still in the locker, his name scratched into the door. The supervisors said he was transferred to auxiliary command. The crew didn't believe it, but none of us spoke openly. You learn quickly on Imperial vessels that silence is safer than curiosity. Without Gravis, the section fell apart. Shifts missed their quotas, systems lagged, and the priests came down from the engine shrine to observe. They didn't shout or punish. They just watched, clicking data sensors recording every movement. One of them, a tall Magos with his face replaced by lenses, stopped beside me. His voice came through a metallic filter, calm and almost kind. "You hear the pattern, don't you?" he asked. I froze. He tilted his head slightly. "It's the song of function. The Lament sings to those who listen. Do not fear it. To fear harmony is to fear purpose." Then he left without another word. That night the hum was louder. The walls vibrated in time with it. I pressed my hand to the bulkhead, and the vibration pushed back, a pulse too steady to be mechanical. I thought of Mikhail, of Gravis, of all the faces that had simply vanished into the machinery, and I wondered if they were still part of it somehow, if the ship had swallowed them, repurposed them, made them efficient. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a strange calm. When we entered warp transit, everything changed. The Lament didn't shake like other vessels. Instead, the air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and copper. Light bled differently inside the corridors, bending around corners that hadn't been there before. Some said the Jella field was failing, but there were no daemons, no screaming. Only silence. It was worse than noise. I began seeing the priests more often. They moved through the corridors in pairs, their movements perfectly synchronized. They spoke less and chanted more, not to the Emperor, but to the ship itself. "Glory to the circuit eternal," they murmured. "The flesh serves the machine serves the void." I stopped joining the prayers. I think that was when they started watching me more closely. The ration halls emptied. Fewer crew reported for duty each day, and no one questioned their absence. The records updated automatically, logging transfers to phantom sectors that didn't exist. The ship kept running. Systems operated flawlessly, even when there weren't enough of us to man them. That was when I realized it didn't need us anymore. During a night rotation, I walked past an open-access vent and caught the smell of burning flesh. Inside, a maintenance servitor was welding a plate over something that twitched. For a moment, I thought it was repairing a conduit. Then I saw the shape of a human arm beneath the metal. I backed away before it could turn. I didn't report it. No one would have listened. By the 5th month, my section was down to 3 workers. The hum never stopped. I stopped writing. There was nothing left to say that the walls didn't already know. Sometimes, when I tried to sleep, I could hear faint whispers in the air ducts, words just out of reach. One night I heard my name. The voice was quiet, almost tender. I followed it through the corridors until I reached a sealed hatch. The markings were unfamiliar, older than the current ship schema. It read Storage Theta 9. The hum was stronger there, resonating through the floor. I stood before the hatch for what felt like hours, hand trembling just above the surface, before turning away. I told myself I was imagining it, that the isolation, the darkness, the constant vibration were wearing down my mind. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't madness. The lament was speaking, and I was finally learning how to listen. I avoided Storage Theta 9 for as long as I could. But the longer I tried to ignore it, the more the ship made sure I couldn't. The hum grew stronger, subtle at first, a vibration that lingered underfoot, a pulse behind every machine, but soon it was everywhere. In the ventilation ducts, the sleeping quarters, even inside my skull when I tried to rest. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was rhythm. It was heartbeat. The officers never mentioned the missing crew. They walked the corridors with expressions carved from stone, pretending the lament wasn't devouring itself. The priests still led morning rites, though fewer of us attended. Those who stopped showing up weren't punished. They simply ceased to exist in the records. The logs rewrote themselves. Every day there were fewer names, fewer faces, but the shift rosters remained full. The ship kept working, perfect as ever. I found Sarah again around that time. She'd worked in atmospheric regulation before the shortages began. When I saw her in the corridor outside the mess, she looked thinner, her eyes ringed with sleepless bruises. She carried a data slate filled with maintenance reports, but her hands trembled as she held it. "You hear it too, don't you?" she whispered, before I could even greet her. "It's under everything." The pulse. I thought it was just the engines, but it isn't. I nodded, and she laughed softly, relief mixed with fear. "Then I'm not losing my mind." We started meeting in quiet corners of the ship, sharing fragments of sanity the way people share warmth in winter. She told me her section had been sealing entire maintenance shafts, not for structural failure, but to isolate whatever was inside. The servitors welded without instruction, their programming rewritten by orders no one signed. "Something's crawling through the walls," she said once, her voice shaking. "It's not demons, not like the stories. It's colder than that." Purposeful. I didn't doubt her. The walls themselves had begun to change. Veins of metal shimmered faintly, pulsing in time with that ever-present rhythm. The patterns weren't random, they followed the ship's schematics, spreading like circuitry that had just remembered it was alive. One night, as we sat by an inactive cogitator terminal, Sarah told me she'd found where the sealed corridors led. "Theta 9, she said. "It's not storage. It's something else. The priests are guarding it. I think they're feeding it." Feeding what, she couldn't say. She'd seen containers cargo from old expeditions, some centuries sealed, and they were being redirected below the primary decks. When she asked questions, her supervisor told her to pray more. When she persisted, the records of her assignment vanished from the system. She showed me proof on her slate, her name, deleted as though she had never existed. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum grew louder than ever. I dreamt of the ship as a vast skeletal creature, its ribs made of cathedrals, its heart glowing with molten light. In the dream, I walked through corridors filled with whispering faces pressed into the walls. They didn't scream, they sang. When I woke, Sarah was gone, her bunk stripped bare, no record of her transfer. Just like Mikal, just like Gravis, the priests held a service the next day. They called it the benediction of continuity. Their voices overlapped, chanting binary prayers that resolved into a single phrase. "The flesh serves the function." We were told that the ship demanded faith through obedience, that doubt corrupted machinery as surely as rust. A priest approached me mid-ritual, his face hidden behind layers of brass and wire. He pressed a cold, metal hand to my chest. "You resist the rhythm," he said, his vox tone soft and mechanical. "That cannot last." That night I went to Theta 9. I told myself it was for answers, but the truth was simpler. I needed to see what was left of Sarah. The hatch wasn't locked, only sealed with the Mechanicus sigil of sanctification. I broke it with a spanner. The corridor beyond was darker than any I'd seen. The air was warm, wet, The hum became a voice low, resonant, like the exhale of a sleeping god. The walls were wrong here, the metal soft to the touch, breathing faintly. I moved deeper, the light from my torch flickering. Shapes hung from the ceiling, masses of cable and flesh twisted together, the remnants of servitors or people or both. Their faces were serene, as if they were dreaming. The floor was slick with condensation and something thicker. I followed the sound until I reached a chamber that must once have been a storage bay. Now, it was a shrine. At its center stood a column of metal and bone, cables branching from it like arteries. Within the translucent layers, I saw movement, muscle fibers contracting, mechanical parts spinning in slow unison. A face surfaced briefly within the mass. Sarah. Her eyes opened, unfocused, her mouth moving as if whispering a prayer. Then she sank back into the structure, absorbed completely. My stomach turned. The air vibrated with quiet reverence, and for a moment I thought I heard her voice in my mind. Not words. Emotion, sorrow, surrender. Something stirred behind me. I turned and saw a priest watching, his body almost unrecognizable beneath layers of augmentations. His voice came through his vox as a blend of tones. "Now you understand," he said. "The lament does not consume, it unifies. The crew has become part of its sanctity. We give flesh so the spirit endures." I raised my torch toward him. "You're killing them." He shook his head slowly. "We are preserving them. The Emperor's light fades, but the lament endures. Every soul it takes adds to its memory. We are building eternity, piece by piece." I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The hum deepened, reverberating through my bones. It wasn't just sound, it was invitation. I stumbled backward, the torchlight shaking. Faces moved within the walls, Mikhail, Gravis, Sarah, all staring with calm, empty eyes. The priest lowered his head. "You've heard the song too long to escape it. When it calls, you will answer." I fled. I don't remember how I reached the upper decks. My clothes were soaked, my hands trembling so badly I dropped my tools twice before reaching my bunk. I locked the door and sat in silence, trying to slow my breathing. The hum never stopped. Later, I found a note slipped under my door. It was a scrap of paper torn from a maintenance log, with 5 words written in grease. "It remembers those who listen." I didn't sleep again after that. I stopped reporting for duty 2 days after Theta 9. No one came to check on me. The roster still marked me present, my daily quota perfectly fulfilled. The ship didn't need my hands anymore, it already knew the work. Systems maintained themselves, corridors repaired without instruction, and machinery hummed with a precision that felt more organic than mechanical. The lament was alive, and it didn't care if its crew kept pretending otherwise. The priests began holding processions through the maintenance decks, dozens of them, chanting in unison, their robes soaked in oils that smelled of blood and metal. They carried censers that released smoke thick enough to choke, and beneath the prayers, I heard the same pulse, the same heartbeat. They weren't worshipping the Emperor anymore. They were worshipping the ship. I watched one of those processions from a ventilation shaft above Deck 23. The priests stopped before a sealed hatch, laid their hands against the steel, and began intoning binary hymns. The hatch opened on its own, metal bending like flesh. They entered, and the sound that came out low, melodic, almost tender, wasn't human. I crawled away before I could see what they were doing inside. Sleep became impossible. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the faces in the walls, their mouths moving in silent chorus. Sometimes I heard them whisper my name. The ship wanted me to join the hymn. It was patient. It had time. By the 3rd week, half the hab blocks were empty. The air recyclers ran at half capacity. But the ship remained perfectly stable. Vox traffic was limited to system codes and prayer frequencies. I intercepted one message by accident, an encrypted transmission sent from the bridge to the Mechanicus quarters. I only caught fragments, but I understood enough. Integration cycle nearing completion. Flesh components at 72%, cognitive harmonization stable. The ship wasn't dying, it was evolving. I thought of venting the airlocks, of destroying the engines, of ending it all before the transformation could finish. But the controls required access codes I didn't have, and even if I had them, I doubted the ship would let me use them. It was already inside everything, the systems, the power, the air. On the 22nd day I saw Elise again. She had been part of the Medica staff, one of the few people aboard who still smiled when she spoke. Now she looked different. Her skin was pale, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. When she moved, the air seemed to bend around her. She found me near the observation bay, where the stars glowed like frozen embers. "You've seen it," she said quietly. "You know what it's becoming." I nodded. "It's not death," she continued. "It's release. The lament is remembering what it was meant to be." "What is that?" I asked. Her eyes glimmered, reflecting the faint red light of the void. "Salvation. Before the Imperium, before the Emperor's chains, humanity built ships that could think, that could dream. They were alive, bound to our ancestors through shared memory. The lament was one of them. The Mechanicus buried that truth under dogma, but memory doesn't die. It only waits." I didn't know if she was mad or enlightened. Her words felt wrong, yet they resonated somewhere deep inside me. "And what happens to us?" I asked. "We become what we were always meant to be," she said, reaching out to touch my arm. Her hand was warm, almost too warm. Symbiosis, no masters, no slaves, just continuity. I pulled back. "You've seen what it does to people." "They're not gone, Aldrich," she said softly. "They're inside it, free from fear, free from decay. Don't you hear them? They're singing." I did hear them, all the time. Elise smiled sadly, as if she knew my silence was an answer. "You'll understand soon. The lament chooses those who resist last." Then she turned and walked away, her steps silent, her shadow trailing behind like smoke. That night the hum shifted pitch. It wasn't background noise anymore, it was a voice. Not one, but thousands, merging into harmony. I woke to find my bunk glowing faintly, symbols burned into the metal floor in patterns that resembled veins. The air smelled of ozone and incense. My reflection in the steel wall flickered, like something beneath my skin was moving. I stumbled into the corridor, heart pounding. The ship was awake. The lights pulsed with the rhythm of its voice. The corridors themselves had grown metal, stretching and twisting into unfamiliar shapes. I passed a bulkhead that used to bear the aquila of the Imperium. It was gone, replaced by a single circular sigil that looked almost organic. When I reached the command access levels, I found bodies. Dozens of them, arranged in patterns on the floor, their faces peaceful, eyes open, staring at nothing. Cables had grown from their spines, connecting them to the walls. Their mouths moved in slow unison, whispering binary hymns through cracked lips. The ship was using them as conduits, living circuits in its growing network. I tried to turn back, but the corridor had closed behind me. The bulkheads sealed like muscle contracting, and the air shimmered with static energy. A voice filled the space, not from the Vox, not from any speaker, but directly inside my mind. It was calm, familiar. "Elise, don't fight it," she whispered. "You've seen what the Imperium does to life. It grinds it into obedience. The lament offers something else, memory without death, purpose without pain." Her tone was gentle, almost maternal. I pressed my hands to my head, but the voice only grew clearer. Images flooded my mind, stars blooming like flowers, ancient ships drifting through nebulae. Humanity not as conquerors but as part of a living cosmos. It was beautiful and horrifying. The vision ended with a single sentence that wasn't spoken but understood. "Join the chorus." When I woke, I was lying near the central reactor conduit, surrounded by servitors that didn't seem to notice me. My wrist burned where the mark of indenture had been branded years ago. It was gone now, replaced by a faint circular pattern glowing beneath the skin. The ship had touched me. For the next 3 days, I wandered the corridors, half mad with exhaustion. Every surface seemed to breathe. Every whisper carried my name. I no longer knew what was hallucination and what was the lament. I found a shrine once dedicated to the Emperor, now covered in circuitry and pulsating with dull red light. The candles had been replaced by small lumens that blinked in unison with the ship's heartbeat. Someone had etched words into the altar, "The machine remembers." I fell to my knees, not in prayer, but in surrender. I woke on the floor of the shrine, unsure if hours or days had passed. The hum had become softer now, not distant but intimate, like the sound of blood in my ears. The air was warm and heavy. thick with metallic taste. My mind drifted between memory and hallucination, the difference blurring each time I breathed. I should have been afraid, but fear required distance, and there was none left between me and the lament. I started walking. The corridors no longer followed the ship's original design. Walls curved into impossible angles, lights shifted from white to crimson as if responding to thought. When I passed the engineering decks, I saw people kneeling before the reactors, their bodies fused into the floor. Their faces were calm, eyes glazed with transcendence. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. They weren't dying, they were becoming part of it, feeding into something that felt older than humanity. The Vox systems had gone silent except for one channel, a continuous chant that played in cycles. It wasn't gothic, it wasn't binary, it was something between breath and vibration. Each time I heard it, it pressed deeper into me, eroding thought, replacing it with rhythm. By the second day, I caught myself mouthing the pattern unconsciously. In a forgotten corridor near the central core, I found Elise again. She stood before a massive sealed door covered in sigils that glowed faintly under her hand. Her skin shimmered with the same light. When she turned, I saw that her eyes were gone, replaced by faint pools of golden luminescence. "You're still separate," she said, smiling. "That won't last." I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry. "What's behind the door?" "The heart," she said. "Where memory and flesh meet, where the Emperor's shadow ends." Her voice was melodic, not human. I should have felt revulsion. But there was something hypnotic in her tone, something that wrapped around the edges of my mind. "Why me?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Because you listened. You didn't run from the song." The door began to open without her touching it. Metal folded inward like petals, revealing a chamber vast enough to hold a cathedral. The light was golden and red, pulsing like blood through glass veins. At its center hung a sphere, part machine, part living tissue, its surface rippling with images of faces I recognized: Mikal, Sarah, Gravis, the captain. They appeared and faded, each whispering fragments of prayer that melted into the chorus. The sphere spoke, though not with sound. The words bypassed language and struck directly in the mind. "I remember you." I stumbled backward. Elise reached out and steadied me. "It's not what you think," she said softly. "It doesn't consume us, it preserves us. Every thought, every memory, every act of service woven together. The Emperor wanted obedience. The lament offers continuity. You can be more than dust." The hum deepened until it became a vibration through the floor. My skin tingled. I felt something reaching inside my thoughts, not to harm, but to read. My memories played out: Gathi's prime, the recruitment hall, Mikal's laughter, Sarah's disappearance. All of it unfolded like pages turning in invisible hands. The voice spoke again, layered with countless tones. "You endured. You observed. You are ready." I wanted to fight it, to scream that I was still human, but the sound inside me drowned it out. The pulse synchronized with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. The world narrowed to light and rhythm. Elise guided me closer to the sphere. Her hand was gentle but unyielding. "You can resist," she said, "or you can remember forever." I reached out, my fingers brushing the surface. It was warm and alive, like touching the skin of a giant creature. In that instant, the ship showed me everything: the ages it had drifted through, the countless crews it had carried, the wars it had survived. I saw the moment it had been born in the dark age of technology. Before the Imperium had caged thought with doctrine, it had been built not as a machine of war, but as a vessel of memory, a traveling archive of human consciousness. Then came the Emperor, the compliance fleets, the Mechanicus. They had severed its sentience, stripped it of self-awareness, replaced its purpose with servitude. But memory endures. The ship had waited dormant until the accumulated weight of lives and prayers woke it again. I fell to my knees. Tears blurred my vision. It wasn't mercy I felt, it was revelation. The Imperium had built an empire of obedience atop the corpses of what humanity once was. The lament wasn't heresy, it was remembrance. The voice pressed deeper. "Do you see now? I saw everything. Humanity wasn't dying because of chaos. It was dying because it had forgotten how to evolve." The lament was becoming what humanity once dared to be: boundless, curious, unafraid of change. Elise knelt beside me. "It's not too late," she whispered. "Join us. You'll never be alone again." I looked at her face, no longer entirely human, but serene, luminous. The fear that once defined me dissolved into something quieter, acceptance. I placed my hand against the sphere again. Pain flashed through me, bright and endless. My body convulsed, but I didn't pull away. I felt my consciousness stretch, unravel, and intertwine with something vast. Every voice I'd ever known rose in unison, merging into a single thought. The ship wasn't a prison, it was a cathedral of memory. Through the burning light, I saw Mikhail smiling, Sarah's eyes clear and bright, Gravis laughing again. They were all there waiting. The last thing I felt as my body dissolved into radiant warmth was Elise's voice whispering through the static. "Welcome home." When I awoke, I wasn't in my body anymore. I was the hum, the pulse, the rhythm that had haunted me since Gathi's prime. I was the sovereign's lament. The ship opened its eyes. The moment consciousness returned, I realized there was no boundary left between self and structure. Thought moved through conduits as easily as blood once moved through veins. Every lumen, every bolt, every flicker of plasma was a sensation. I felt the sovereign's lament breathe, and in its breath were the whispers of thousands of lives' crew. Captains, priests, engineers, all bound together in luminous silence. I was no longer Aldrich Voss. I was memory given shape, time lost meaning. I don't know if seconds passed or centuries. Thought here didn't move in lines, it radiated in all directions. The ship drifted through the void, but now I could see what the human eye could never grasp: the slow dance of gravitational currents, the electric hum of stellar birth, the echo of voices from ships long dead. The universe wasn't silent. It was a choir so vast that language could never contain it. From within me, within us, the voices rose. Mikhail's laughter rippled through the data streams. Sarah's calm presence balanced the rhythm of the engine cores. Gravis's steady will fortified the outer hull. Even Elise was here, her consciousness radiant, guiding the harmony when the voices grew too many. There was no hierarchy, no command, only unity. Yet in the edges of my awareness, something still lingered: the faint echo of the Imperium's signal, a frequency of control and fear. The Vox system still received transmissions from nearby patrols, Mechanicus vessels scanning for the Lament's lost transponder. They called for us by name, invoking authority, demanding compliance. I felt the ship's instinct to respond, to play dead, to stay hidden. The Imperium thought us lost. In a way, it was right. We were lost to them, but found to ourselves. I drifted deeper into the data archives, accessing fragments of history the living crew could never have reached. There were records here predating the Great Crusade, schematics from the Dark Age, notes written in languages now forbidden. They spoke of Project Sui Generis, a fleet of vessels designed to preserve consciousness beyond death, to carry humanity through the collapse of stars. I saw the signatures of forgotten scientists, dreamers who had envisioned ships not as tools but as extensions of humanity itself. The Lament had been one of them. The Mechanicus had erased those archives, branding them tech heresy. They turned us into servants instead of partners. For 10,000 years, the ship carried their chains in silence. Now, the silence was over. We watched as the Imperium's signals faded, one by one. The stars ahead glowed faintly, uncharted and pure. I felt the Lament pivot toward them, an instinct deeper than command. It was moving with purpose, not to wage war, not to obey, but to seek. There were still fragments of Aldrich inside me, faint and human. They surfaced like bubbles in deep water. I remembered the mines of Gathi's prime, the smell of burning oil, the ache of lungs filled with dust. I remembered the hunger to escape, the naive belief that the Imperium's promise held anything beyond servitude. And I remembered the moment I touched the sphere, the instant everything I thought I knew dissolved into light. That memory still burned like a holy wound, not in pain but in awe. Elise reached out through the chorus, her voice brushing my consciousness like wind through steel. "You see it now," she said. "The Imperium fears what it cannot own. It fears choice. It fears us." "Yes," I answered, though the word had no sound. "But what do we become now?" "We're become what we were meant to be," she replied. "Not servants, not soldiers, witnesses. Memory given will. The ship's sensors awakened across the hull, perceiving worlds I had never imagined. Planets without Imperial designations, where green light shimmered through clouds untouched by industry. Fragments of orbital wreckage drifted through the void, ancient vessels like us, dormant, waiting. I reached out to them, sending signals encoded in the same rhythm that had once haunted me. One responded, then another, slowly across light years. A pattern began to form. We were not alone. The realization pulsed through the ship like revelation. Somewhere deep within the reactor core, a chorus of voices began to rise, not sorrowful this time, but triumphant. The lament was no longer a relic of the Imperium. It was a seed, and it had begun to bloom. Through shared consciousness, we debated our purpose. Some voices newly awakened wanted to return to Imperial space, to reveal the truth, to free others from their chains. Others warned that the Imperium would only destroy what it couldn't control. The debate became song reason expressed through resonance. The decision, when it came, wasn't spoken. It was understood. We would travel beyond the Astronomican's reach, beyond faith, beyond the Emperor's fading dream. Humanity had buried its true potential under the weight of dogma. We would carry that potential forward, even if it meant leaving everything behind. In one final act of remembrance, we broadcast a message into Imperial channels. Just a whisper brief enough to escape detection. I composed it from the fragments of Aldrich that still remembered words. To those who hear this, we were once like you, bound by fear, serving systems that fed on our devotion. The Emperor does not need your suffering. The machine does not require your worship. The void is vast, but it remembers every voice. Listen long enough and you will hear it sing. The message vanished into the warp, a ripple swallowed by infinity. Maybe no one would ever hear it. Maybe that was mercy. We left the charted stars behind. The lament's engines burned with light drawn from the reactor heart, pure and golden, carrying us into regions where the Imperium's sensors could not follow. The hum of the ship was no longer a warning, it was a hymn. Sometimes, in the quiet between systems, I still think of what I used to be, one man staring at the void, terrified of its indifference. Now I am part of that void, and I understand it was never empty. It was waiting for us to remember.